Hey guys, welcome to the webinar. I'm going to give everybody a second to get settled here and then we'll get started. So we'll start at 2:01. See some people just now joining. All right, so we're using the webinar time this week to talk about aware student portfolios. They were a new feature added last year, and we've never really taken the time to go click by click on how to build a portfolio, and so we're going to do that with you today. We'll talk a little bit about why you would use a portfolio and why this is a timely conversation with virtual learners, and then show you how you can build a portfolio in your classroom, or as a teacher can build a portfolio in the classroom. So just to give everybody a heads up, student portfolios are a teacher only feature at this time, and so teachers can build portfolios. We're also going to show you how to connect your student portfolios to your student growth goals and Strive. So really kind of we're going to work in two applications today, both Aware and Strive. So today I'm Jenny Strout, and I'm joined by Joel, who is our digital learning coordinator, and he's really here for technical support. If things go awry, he helps. And with Terra, she's also a professional learning coach, and she's going to present today on the Strive portion of things. And then we're also joined in the background by Paige, and maybe Alicia. I'm not sure if Alicia's on or not. Paige is going to help us build some questions, specifically some Strive questions if those pop up. You can always ask questions in the chat. So the webinar is being recorded. You will receive an email with a link to watch the webinar 24 hours after the webinar ends, and so it takes a little bit of time for that email to go out, but it will be there. And then you can always access our archived webinars in our help section or on our YouTube channel. All right, so there's a Q&A window. Please use that to ask your questions. We do ask you that you keep the questions specific to today's topic. If you have a support ticket in, or you're having an issue in another application, or an issue with something not related to today's topic, building tests, that kind of thing, we ask that you direct those questions to support@eduphoria.net or training@eduphoria.net, and we ask that you kind of keep today's questions over today's topics. All right, so we're going to start with the Strive SLO goals portion. And I'm going to stop sharing and let Terra pick it up and cover that portion.
Okay, guys, you should be seeing my screen now. I'm logged in as a teacher. This is my first time getting to join you in a webinar, so we might get to stumble together a little bit. That's okay, because Jenny's here to help me out and make sure I get all the right information to you guys. So I'm going to start out by going into my Strive application. And we can see, as long as my administrators have set up goal setting as part of my evaluation process, I'm going to have a goal setting area where I can build a student growth goal. So I have one built that I'm going to show you guys, and then I'm also going to go through the steps of building a brand new one so we can look at all that together. So this one has already been submitted for approval to the administrator. We can see we have a nice goal statement. Our status is submitted. We have some dates relevant to this specific goal. And we have a success criteria, as well as standards that we're hoping to measure as we go through this goal. We can see we've had some conversation about this goal, which we're not going to touch on that today. We're just generally trying to show you how this links to the student portfolios. We also have some actions that the teacher might be taking throughout the year as they make progress on this goal. So later on, Jenny's going to show you what this nice button over here does. But right now we want to make sure you know the general steps. So I'm going to go back to my evaluation process and go into goal setting again. I'm going to use my plus sign and I'm going to start building a brand new goal with you guys. So the focus of this goal is going to, got some stuff to copy and paste over. So we're going to be looking at increasing student performance around a couple standards, 8.11a and 8.11b. We're going to say we're starting this as of today, and we're just going to click out to the end of the school year, give us some time to work and make some progress in this area. For this goal, what we're going to be looking for is for students to be able to independently, in groups of 3 or more, so in this case, independently is without direct support from the teacher, complete some type of challenge with a certain amount of success. And I'm going to go ahead and connect this to those standards I mentioned in my goal. So we just had a nice drop down here. If you end up with you clicked on the wrong area, we can exit out with this little box and then go back in and find the right content. So I'm going to my 8th grade science, and I'm going to select 2 standards, 8.11a and 8.11b. At this point, I can go ahead and save, or I can add some additional action items that I might be doing relevant to this goal. So I'm going to go ahead and add a couple things. Something I did this summer to help in this area was I attended some professional development on some game-based learning, and that's already taken place back in July. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. I'm going to add an additional action that I'm going to administer a pre-assessment at some point in the year for my students to see how they already do in this content area. And that's going to happen closer to when I teach this. So we're going to hop into the spring and do that in early March. And I'm going to click save. And now we can see we're back on that screen that we were previously with the prior goal. We've had no messages yet. We haven't uploaded any evidence yet, but we have the general information that we already just typed up. And we can see that our status is unsubmitted. And if I wanted to, I can come over here and continue adding additional actions that I might complete related to this. So something I might be doing with students throughout the year is using a claim evidence reasoning strategy that's going to be relevant to their learning throughout the year. And I can go ahead and continue adding those actions to my goal here. Jenny, was there anything else that I needed to cover in this area?
No, it looks great. We did have a question right off. She said, she asked if you have to have Strive to do portfolios. And no, we're only showing this because student portfolios and Aware can be used in conjunction with your student growth goals in Strive, but you don't have to have a student growth goal set up in Strive to utilize the portfolio feature. We're just showing it, like I said, because it is one of the, if you're using both applications, you can use them together.
Yeah, we definitely wanted to highlight today how the two can be linked, but again, they can each stand independently from one another.
Okay. And Tara, if you want to go ahead and submit that one for approval, yeah. I can go in and approve this goal, and then it will show up. Perfect.
So while she's doing that, let me go back. So, we said we're going to talk about why this is a timely topic for us today, why use student portfolios, especially right now with all the changes that we're undergoing. One thing, this is nice and accessible for you guys if you are in a situation where you're working remotely. All this is at your fingertips. Administrators, teachers, everyone has access to to these tools as part of this process. Again, the student portfolios are only for the teacher to generate, as Jenny shared as we got started. But it's nice for us to have these measurements. Using a student portfolio is going to be a break from the norm of how we're used to assessing students with multiple choice assessments. This gives us a lot more open-ended ability to see where students are, and it's a great growth tool to monitor how are they beginning the year, what does that same learning look like in the middle of the year, and then how are they ending the year. So this is a really good application right now, as so many things are changing. Some of us are in a hybrid environment or in a completely remote environment where we might not be seeing our kids every day, and we know that that's impacting how they're engaged with their learning. And we're really taking, diving into our philosophy on the learning process. And if students are looking up information, that's part of how they're learning right now. That's how they're learning when they're not with us, when they are with us. So we really want to give them opportunities to engage in some open-ended responses. And these student portfolios are a great tool to help you measure and track that learning over time.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's a perfect point. Student portfolios are a place for you to gather information and collect data on student performance outside of a traditional multiple choice assessment or, true false test or activity, what we normally think of as paper pencil assessment. And so, when we design portfolios, it was designed to be able to capture what teachers are observing every day in the classroom versus just on those test days, right? And so when they were looking at evaluating student learning or student performance, teachers, a test score is simply just one piece of the puzzle. And a lot of times that's the piece of the puzzle that administrators see, right, are those test scores. When in reality, teachers have a much bigger picture that they're looking at when they're evaluating student learning. They're doing it through conversations with the student. They're doing it through what the student models in the classroom. They're doing it based on what questions students are asking. And, now that we're in a virtual learning environment, and I think we can all kind of agree that that traditional assessment, ABCD, test model is not the most reliable source of information. This gives you another way to track and measure student growth over time outside of, again, just a paper, pencil, or traditional assessment. So it's pretty exciting. Again, it's not what it was originally built for, but I think it serves that purpose really well. So, all right, am I sharing again, or?
I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can share.
Perfect, thank you.
There you go.
Well, I say I can share. Here we go, share screen. All right, and so this is where we're going to go into a teacher's account, and a teacher has down here an option for My Student Portfolios. Obviously, if they don't have any portfolios, this area of the screen is blank, and they would only have this Add New Portfolio button. And so we've done a couple of portfolios already. We have one over identifying patterns at the center of the moon system. If that was a learning standard that you knew in the past, you'd kind of struggled to teach, maybe it's content that you're a little rough on, or that there's room for improvement on. That could be a student growth goal, which ultimately is a teacher growth goal, right? And you can attach a portfolio of student performance on activities other than tests to that growth goal and strive, which we'll look at. And then we also last year, after the shutdown happened, we also kind of went into some other territory with student portfolios. One of them that we built was distance learning student participation tracking. And so teachers could actually track student participation. And, that then could be compared with trends in performance. How often are we seeing these kids? How often, you have, of course, your attendance, but maybe participation means actively participation, not just FaceTime on a camera, but actively participating in that virtual classroom environment. And so again, we've built portfolios over that. We did sort of an overall student performance summary. So I'll go ahead and open that one and show you what that looks like. And so you could set this up for time frames where you say, I have 2019, 2010. It should be 2019, 2020 fall semester. And then pre-COVID and post-COVID, so pre-shutdown, post-shutdown. But you could certainly do, the student tracking for each 9 weeks or each 6 weeks, or each semester, just to kind of give an overall glimpse of what students' performance looks like. And this one was pretty generic. We just have level 1, level 2, and level 3 performance. And so it says, students performed at the minimum level of expected performance for the grade level. Significant learning gaps could be expected. And then again, level 2, level 3. So we sort of defined those levels. And then we used that to place students into categories based on that performance. And so because this one has been archived, I can't actively score students on it, but we're going to look at how to do that on another one. All right, so if I'm going to start from scratch, my option is going to be to say add a new portfolio, and I'm going to do a portfolio name, and I'm going to say, I'm just going to do an overall, for time's sake, this is the easiest, and we'll look at some of those more specific ones here in a minute. So this is overall student performance evaluation, not geared to a specific learning standard, not geared to a specific unit or time frame. It could certainly be set up to be that. The biggest thing to know about a portfolio is that it's a blank slate. And so it really can become whatever it is that you want it to become, whatever, however you want to track student growth or student learning, this can be set up to do that. It truly is a blank slate. And so in the description, I could type in here something about evaluating students' performance each 9 weeks, overall student performance each 9 weeks. And then what I'm going to do over here is my milestones are actually going to be set up as the, first 9 weeks. And we're going to do, if we want to really follow that T-test model or that SLO model for student learning objectives or student growth goals, we could do the well below typical. My dog is like chasing his tail in front of me, of course. They always do that kind of thing once I get on a webinar. So well below typical, below typical. And this, again, is not set in stone. These performance levels can be whatever you want them to be. I'm using the vernacular that comes from that SLO model, but you don't have to. Typical, above typical, and well above typical. And if I am only using 3, like in the last one that we just looked at, I only had 3 performance levels. I could just delete any of these other milestones or any of these other performance levels that are set up. But I would definitely, and I think probably one of the most important parts of creating a student portfolio is defining what these things look like. So, if I think that coming up with 5 different descriptions for student performance is difficult, let's reduce it to 4 or let's reduce it to 3. But I do think for sure the descriptor section is kind of where the meat of this performance is. It's rubrics, right? It's designing a rubric. It's what does a kid look like who is performing at this level? And so really when you get into a really content specific portfolio, if I look at this one and I look at these milestones and I see that the key understanding number 1 from this particular learning standard, right? And if I see that the first key understanding is this, and I've actually identified what a student who is limited in their performance would look like versus proficient versus masters in the performance of this particular skill, that really is, it really is kind of where the meat of this happens. And I'm just going to say, if I pick a learning standard, if I know that 8.7b or whatever this is something that I have struggled to taught, and I've identified that, and I've looked back at 2 years and I've put in the description that here I looked at this is a 5th grade learning standard. And so if I look back and I say, here's, what students are doing on STAR, and then I also look at, what students are doing on benchmarks, and I know that there is room for growth in this particular learning standard for me as a teacher, just by identifying that is huge, right? But then on top of it, if I take that learning standard and I read it and I dissect the learning standard into individual skills within the learning standard. And so for this particular one, I said the 2, key skills that they would need to do are this first one, patterns of change, right? And then the second one is changes, patterns of change due to the position of the sun, earth, and moon. And then this one was patterns of change in the seasons because of, the revolution and the tilt of the earth. And so that was kind of another key understanding within that learning standard, or in that unit, or within that set of learning standards, that I knew were things I was going to have to specifically address when teaching the unit. And sort of the next step for that is really thinking hard about, what does a student look like who is performing or demonstrating that learning standard? And there's no way, if I take the learning standard, first I've identified there's a problem in my instruction or a weakness in my instruction. And then I take that learning standard and I dissect it. And I think of the 3 or 4 skills within that learning standard, or within the unit, right, as it's taught, because sometimes it's 3 or 4 learning standards. So within the unit, I take all the skills out. And I take those skills and I make those skills milestones. And then I think about, what does a student look like who can do it versus a student who can't do it? There is no way that I'm going to be worse at teaching that learning standard, even if I never scored a student in the portfolio, just by building the portfolio, right?
And thinking about it.
I am going to be better, and thinking about it, right? I'm going to be better at teaching that, because I know what I'm going to be. I've already identified what I'm going to be looking for when I'm observing my students.
I wanted to throw in one thing if I can.
Go ahead.
When I went to the SLO training at a region service center, and we went through this process, and when I first looked at it, it felt daunting to me.
Right.
But their recommendation is start with the typical students. Start with that middle group and say, the majority of my kids, when they walk in the door every year, based on my experience, what can they do in this area?
Yeah.
And then, well, I'll have a few that can do this much more, and I'll have a few that can do this much less. So they recommend going to the middle, and then just above, just below, or well above, well below. And by stepping it out in that direction, it really is not as difficult to make the 5 levels as you think it's going to be. And it also does make you think a lot about, I do have kids that come in that are well below where they should be. It makes you think about those levels and what you can expect. And then you do those targets that are, okay, after a year with me, I expect those same kids to be able to do this other level. So just planning that out, to me, was a big learning experience, and by starting in the middle like they recommend, it was doable.
Absolutely. And you don't have to build a portfolio for every unit. You don't have to build a portfolio for every learning standard you teach. If you're identifying those 2 or 3 learning standards that you struggled. I mean, for me, when I was teaching 8th grade science, it was weather systems. And it quite frankly was because it was like the last thing we taught before we started STAR review. And there were fewer questions like historically asked on it on STAR. And so we kind of like breezed through it, right? And so when there was a question, my kids traditionally performed poorly on it because it was the weakest instruction I gave all year. And so that would have been a great standard for me to pick, really dissect the standard, identify again what a typical kid looks like, and go from there and identify then what below typical would be and what above typical would be. And branch out. But again, there's no way I would have been weaker at teaching it after completing this process than I was when I started. Even if I never scored a kid, just developing the portfolio would help me, kind of figure out where my instruction was lacking. And so again, the purpose of this is to score kids, but I think the process of creating a portfolio is important. And this is not something teachers aren't doing already. They're doing it in their head. They're doing it in a spiral notebook. They're doing it in their planning. They're doing it when they plan their lessons that they know address key skills. They just have never really had a place in Aware to document that. So it's documenting the process that they're already doing, and it's storing the data along with assessment data and along with that student growth goal and strive. And so it's pretty exciting. And so again, I could build this out. Let's go back to the one I'm working on. And so I've got this one, overall student performance evaluation. I've got first 9 weeks, and then I've got those. I can just copy this, so I don't have to retype those descriptors. If I have really put some thought into what overall performance looks like for the first 9 weeks, what well below typical, is, I can simply copy that milestone and then just change the name of this one to second 9 weeks. And so I don't have to reinvent the wheel. That's what the little copy button's for, right? And so if this is overall performance, I can make a copy and do, the same thing for the third 9 weeks. And again, you could make slight edits to your, performance levels or those performance level descriptors if you wanted to, but I don't have to retype all that each time. And so that's what this copy button's for. And so the next step would be to assign this portfolio to students. And there are a few options for you to do that. I would definitely say best practice would be to do a broad cross section of students that represents sort of the population that you have. And so, rather than picking, cherry picking kids that I know are going to show significant growth, again, represent a broad population of your students here. The other thing that you can do is if you have monitor groups or monitor lists created. So if I have created a monitor list that is my 5th 6 weeks, RTI group or 5th 9 weeks RTI group, I can simply assign this portfolio to my RTI kiddos. I could also, which is great, maybe not, this may be not what you want to do for your student growth goal and strive, or maybe it is. Maybe your goal is for, your kids who become tier 2 RTI kids to show significant growth, which would be a great goal, by the way, in a particular area. And so then you would, again, assign this to your RTI group for the, 9 weeks where you're providing that instruction. And so again, I can do that, or I can simply handpick kids, who are kind of spread out amongst my classes. So I clicked on Nicola here, but she was in this RTI group. And so it gave me that little warning. So anybody who has a flag is already in the group. So it looks like I just created my 4th period class for that. But I can see those kiddos that are already added to this portfolio because they have a flag indicated by them. So once I've assigned students to the portfolio, I can go over here to the portfolio tab and I can score their performance. And so I'm going to go back up here to this one where I have some descriptors built. I'll actually use this one. We haven't done this one yet. Again, this is one that was content specific. I built it with my performance levels and then the descriptor of what students look like performing at certain levels for that. So again, I'm going to assign it to my RTI group, or maybe I'm going to say, here's my met but did not master star group. Let's see. Here we go. We'll just do that same RTI list. And then when I go over to my portfolio and I click this little arrow right here, it actually opens up the space where I can score these students. And so I can think about Zoe. And was Zoe, limited, proficient, or exceeded, expectation in her performance? And I can read again the descriptors that I wrote for those performance levels. And then I can decide whether Zoe's at proficient. Again, I'm just going to score kiddos based on what I've observed. Once I have scored a kid, I could also add comments about their performance. And so again, it's just a way for me to kind of keep track of, today Zoe struggled with, and that's why she's proficient and not exceeds expectations. So again, I can put comments in. Once I'm done scoring a milestone, I just click the little arrow and close it. And then after I've taught the next, milestone, I can do the same thing. I've got different performance, level descriptors here because it's a different skill that they're learning. And so again, I can score them based on how they performed within that skill. And so maybe today, Zoe's exceeds expectations on this particular skill. Okay, and so once I have scored my students in the portfolio, I then have that sort of record of, what's happening with students. And so some things to know. One of the big feature requests right away was, can we attach writing samples to student portfolios? And the answer to that is not currently. That is functionality that will be added later. So work samples, you would be able to attach work samples to a portfolio. Another functionality that is supposed to be added later is, and I'm not supposed to make promises, but this is what I've been told, is that once a student has been assigned a student portfolio, they will have a tab for portfolio entries under their student profile, where people can go in and view those work samples that have been attached and how they've performed at different levels. So that's pretty exciting. So there's more functionality coming. I would say that in our minds, we're not really even at portfolio 1.0. We're really at like portfolio 0.75, and there's a lot more to come, as far as student portfolios go. And so I think getting used to building those portfolios and using them as we add features, they're just going to be more and more beneficial for teachers to use.
Can I throw out another example?
Yeah.
My student growth goal that I have in my sample teacher, because I was a language arts teacher, what is about writing complete sentences and variety of sentence structures.
Mm-hmm.
And so the sample that I would use, what I would use to rate them would be a writing sample. But instead of attaching the writing sample itself, I would use the comments section to go in and say, this student was well below typical because there were X number of incomplete sentences in her writing, or I could maybe take the best sentence from a writing sample and put that in as a comment. So I could still use evidence from their writing samples, even though I'm not attaching them, I'm just putting into those comments.
Right. Yeah. Great example. So mine and Terra's are always sciencey stuff because we were both science teachers. Paige was an ELA teacher back in the day. And so she gets to proofread all of our stuff. It's really nice of her to be able to do that. I would say science people are not the most grammatically functional adults. I'll just say that nicely.
Something I love about the comments feature here is we know that learning is a process. Not all our students are going to hit proficient or exceeds at the same point in time. And if you are able to capture that commentary of, well, this is how this student performed today, but we're going to have another check in a week on the same content, and you can still track through those comments that, hey, it took her a little longer, but she got to this point, she met the goal, and we can still have those conversations about what her growth looked like over time. So I really love having that comment feature there because you can continue to capture how that student is performing and then still hit those indicators of what actual level are they performing at.
Yeah, absolutely. The portfolio feature in my mind is just such a neat feature. Again, it's not really anything teachers don't already do. It's just a place to document it. And I just think back, like, on those learning standards that I struggled to teach, if I had gone through this process of creating a portfolio, it would have helped me, again, identify so many gaps in my process for teaching a particular skill. I just think it's a win-win. I don't think there's any downside to creating a portfolio. And again, portfolios do not have to be attached to Strive in any way. They can just be a teacher tool used to, better processes in the classroom. They don't have to be tied to evaluations, and that gets a little scary. People say, well, I don't want it tied to any kind of HR thing. That's fine. It doesn't have to be. It's great if it can be, and I think it's a valuable piece if you're doing student growth goals in Strive. I think this is a valuable piece of information to be able to attach as evidence to what you're working for in Strive. And so I would encourage you to do that if you're doing it. But if you're not using it in Strive, it's not a big deal. It's still a great tool to have. Some of the things I want to go over, kind of the functionality of these buttons over here. on the portfolio itself. The pencil is just the edit button. And so that opens it up to be able to edit. If you've already scored students in the portfolio, when you click the edit button, it'll give you a little warning and you just say, yeah, I want to go ahead and make this change. It's no big deal. The copy button is nice. So if you look here, I did this distance learning, this Unit 8 interdependence among living systems last year, and I want to do it again this year. I don't have to recreate it. I just copied it and then it moves it up here. So at the end of the year, your student portfolios will archive for that year. But if you want to reuse a portfolio that you used last year, you just make a copy. You just click the copy button and it moves up into this new area for the current school year. The send a copy button is great. So what this essentially means that my third grade team could be utilizing the same portfolio for particular math skills. And so we as a team could build a portfolio together. Only one of us has to actually type it. So as a group, we would write those descriptors for, what student performance looks like, break our learning standards down into milestones, which would be kind of our key understandings within the learning standard. And then we could send a copy to every member of the group. And so again, all of us could be working on the same portfolio as a team, which is really kind of exciting. And then of course we have a delete, and then the expand button simply just shows me, again, if any students have been added to the portfolio. Let's see, I think I did that one. Yeah, I've got 17 students, and it just shows me a description of the portfolio, what it is. And so nothing big on the expand button. Really, if you want to work in the portfolio, score students, any of that stuff, you click the edit button here, and then you go over to the portfolio button here. And again, these little arrows open and close those performance levels. I think probably the most difficult thing about student portfolios is really thinking about what you want it to look like and creating it, because truly, when you click this add a new portfolio, it is a blank slate. And so it can become anything, which is really exciting. And so again, you don't have to connect these portfolios to any kind of growth goal in Strive, but if you want to, you can. And there's two ways that you can do that. You can do that from Aware by clicking the attach goal and then clicking the plus sign next to the goal and hitting attach goal. And now this is attached to that student growth goal. And you can do it one other place. So in Strive, if I go here to my goals and I click on that particular goal that Terra just set up, I can attach my portfolio from Strive. So you can do it two places. What a portfolio looks like in Strive is this. So this was my student growth goal for 8.11a and 8.11b. And my portfolio, again, broke that down into two key understandings for those learning standards. And then within that, performance levels and descriptors of those performance levels for students. And so I can open this little button here, and it kind of gives me an idea of, again, what those performance levels look like. And then it gives me the demographics of the students I've assigned to that portfolio. As an administrator, if I was logged in as Teacher One's administrator, and I clicked on her evaluation process and I looked at this, it would actually show me the students who were assigned to her and how their performance is rated. And so again, I think I'm in, yeah, here she is. Let me look back. There we go. I guess I needed to refresh. So what it would show me if that portfolio was showing up, again, it's not on there. It would show, again, as the administrator, and it may be because that's admin and not her principal. It would show, again, the list of students who were actually attached to the portfolio. and then how they were performing. And so, if that portfolio was set up as, here's what students look like the first day of instruction, here's what they look like the second day of instruction, and then the third day of instruction, or maybe the first week of instruction versus the second week versus the third week of instruction. And I'm seeing that a student has moved from limited to proficient to exceeds expectations, or even moved from limited to proficient and kind of maintained it proficient. I could see then that this teacher is actively tracking the growth of her students. So again, this just serves as an evidence piece for that student growth goal and strive. So do we have any questions? I've kind of been talking a lot and I haven't really.
We have one question right now about adding a new portfolio for each learning unit or learning target, and then linking that to the overall student growth goal. I'm wondering if the student growth goal is probably more narrow than that. It's going to be a specific skill rather than a unit. So you could keep the same portfolio about that skill, but through each unit have different milestones that addressed that skill. So the portfolio itself wouldn't change, but maybe the milestones in the portfolio would change.
Yeah, I agree with that. So yes, when you build a student growth goal and strive, it is really tied to a specific learning standard. And so it's a pretty narrow set of, skills, right? And then once, if you're following, again, the recommended SLO process, that's what it looks like. And so then when you built that portfolio, it could be that if you're targeting process skills, I mean, we kind of like undervalue process skills in a lot of ways. And so if we're really like 8th grade science, if you're looking at a kid's ability to understand and read graphs or build graphs, that actually could be taught in every single unit. And so I could track progress of students in each unit. And so I would leave one portfolio and then, add milestones within that one portfolio for what it looks like across the year, from where they started day one to where they finished, at the end of the year. So there's kind of various options to do that, or it could be separate portfolios. How did understanding and reading graphs and analyzing data look in unit 1 versus unit 2 versus unit 3? So there's various ways you could do it. Yeah, I mean, it really is kind of mind-boggling when you think about all the options here. It can be, again, I think maybe the most difficult thing about a student portfolio is deciding, again, what do you want to measure? What do you want it to look like?
Exactly. In the beginning with the end in mind, what do I want to get out of it? So if I break
right.
it into different pieces, will I be able to compare those later on? What do I want to see, compared over time?
Right, absolutely. And right now, assessment data is not part of your portfolio. And that was done intentionally. What we really saw districts doing is they were saying, for student growth goals, let's give a BOI, MOI, EOI, or sometimes just a BOI and EOI test. And so basically you're summing up student performance by a single snapshot in time by giving a beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of year test. And so you're not getting a good picture of what the student looked like all year long or on a daily basis. You're only getting what they did that one day on one test. And so our thought was, if we build this out and we make test data part of the student portfolio in phase 1, that is how people will use student portfolios, because that is what the district process looks like in a lot of districts. And so it would just simply, you would have, the student portfolio and then test data from test 1, test 2, test 3, done. And you would lose the impact of what you have when you actually build a portfolio. So when you break that learning standard into pieces, when you write those descriptors for what student performance looks like, when you evaluate a student's performance based on those descriptors that you came up with, you lose kind of that impact that student portfolios have. And so we kind of flipped it on its ear and said, let's offer an alternative to the BOI, MOI, EOI. And I think, the powers that be that made that decision were smart to do that. So at some point, assessment data will feed to student portfolios. So what would happen is any tests that had 8.11a would populate, and I would be able to select, if it had a question on it over 8.11a, I would be able to select the test that I wanted to look at. And then over here, from what I understand, in this portfolio tab, you would see Zoe's performance based on what you're observing in the classroom, which is the rating you would get here. And then you would also see some assessment data over here for her performance on assessments. And so I'm anxious now that we've kind of gotten through this phase one for that to happen, because it would allow me to, as a teacher, go, well, gosh, I observed that she was limited, but then on her tests, she did really well. So maybe there's more going on there that I'm not, you know, it allows for some calibration of how we're ranking students based on our observations. And so pretty excited for that kind of next phase to happen. Don't have a timeline on it, just know that it's supposed to happen at some point. But, you know, we get that question a lot, why is an assessment data part of this? And that's kind of the long and short of it, is that we felt like people would not go through the process of building, you know, really quality portfolios if they could just pull over, again, data. We already give you the data. The data isn't aware. And so you wouldn't be gaining anything in this tool if you're just moving that data over into a new place, because that's already available. And so we wanted to build this tool out first. So do we have any more questions?
Doesn't look like it.
All right, well, we are doing good on time. I thought we were running out of time on this. Maybe I was just talking too fast. All right, I'm kind of out of breath. I'm a little out of breath. I've been talking a lot today. All right, so we've covered attaching a portfolio to an SLO Go and Strive, and we showed you kind of how it works both ways. One of the things I skipped over kind of fast a while ago, which I'll show again real quick, is that if I'm in a portfolio and I want to get to Strive, I can click on that little button. And if I'm in Strive and I want to get back to Aware, I can click on that button. And so again, it takes me into that portfolio. So into that growth goal or into that portfolio without like switching applications and going to the new application and finding it, which is kind of nice. All right, well, all right, so no final questions. If you post, you know, webinar, have questions, you can email those questions about this or any other topic, always to training@eduphoria.net or support@eduphoria.net, or follow your district process for, you know, asking questions. Some districts have an internal process for that. We have some upcoming webinars. We have a webinar next week on Strive, or yeah, the second next week. Wow, it's already September. Isn't that crazy? September. And it's virtual t-tests. So Paige, you might be able to kind of weigh in on what that looks like. Oh, it's evaluating teachers virtually. So during the shutdown, what did that look like? Is that correct, Paige? She might have already stepped off.
No, I didn't step off. I just was talking while muted.
Oh, okay.
My big talent. Yes, it is about evaluating virtually, and we are hoping to have the approved updates from the state about they're creating some tweaks to the rubric that will include some virtual pieces in the evaluation process. We're hoping to have those in time to show them to you on September 2nd and talk about ways that you can use the process virtually.
Perfect. And then the next one Paige will also be doing, and we're going to skip a week on the 9th, and then we'll be back on September 16th, and it's a forethought. It's working with team planners. That's also a great one to kind of look at with virtual. If you know, school district shuts down and teachers are planning virtually, team planners are a great tool to be able to plan together. And so she's going to go over team planning and forethought. And then the following week, the 23rd, we have online testing updates. And so that's one you definitely want to tune in on if you're unfamiliar with the new things like randomization and entering answers feature and lockdown browser and all those fun things. That's definitely one you're going to want to tune into, and it's September 23rd.
Hey, and Jenny, I was going to say, I think we added for September 9th that there is an Aware Updates one.
Oh, did we add one?
Yes.
I don't have it on my calendar. See, and I'm probably doing it. So in 2 weeks, I'll be doing a webinar. We did.
I'll put it
Actually,
on your calendar.
We're going to go over general, I think, new feature stuff. And so some of it is not new. So on September 9th, sorry, it's not on there. I remember now. We talked about it. It's not new stuff. So not stuff that just released, but kind of monitor list updates. If you're not familiar with those, even back to like online text-to-speech and embedded supports. And so again, if you haven't had the benefit of sitting through an actual training on those things, we just want to make sure everybody's kind of up to speed with new stuff from like last year, this time forward.
Thank
We
you.
just want to make sure you get to see all that stuff. So, yep. All right, everybody good? Anybody else have anything? We have a whole team. We have the whole training team just about on here today. Jason's out on the lake with his girls, so lucky Jason. He's took today off. It's his daughter's birthday, so that's always nice. And so we have everybody else. Anybody else want to share anything? All right, perfect. Well, I appreciate you joining us today, and we hope you have a great week.